This movie has had so much history before it was even released. The early reviews for this movie were insanely positive, which led to a fan reaction of defending the movie from any negative reviews, despite the fact that many of those fans had not even seen the movie yet. How do you know that you disagree with a review if you have not seen the movie yet? It all led to the fan community talking about how the reviewers are disconnected from the fans, as evidenced by the divergent scores, e.g. critics versus audience, on Rotten Tomatoes. This, despite the fact that on Rotten Tomatoes, both critics and audiences gave the movie mostly positive scores, just not identical scores. Nevertheless, it's interesting that many DC fans frequently have decided to attack Rotten Tomatoes, regardless of the fact that Rotten Tomatoes is co-owned by Warner Brothers, which also owns DC. This movie seemed to have a cultural presence. Unfathomably, people are blaming the movie for things that are outright bizarre. Joaquin Phoenix has been asked questions about whether movies are responsible for violence.
In an interview with The Telegraph, journalist Cullen asked Phoenix if he was worried the movie might perversely end up inspiring exactly the kind of people it's about, with potentially tragic results. Phoenix then got upset. He responded, "Why? Why would you? No, no." And then he left the room.
He's an actor, not a sociologist. Concern over this film has caused security to be amped up in theaters showing it, and theaters taking extraordinary precautions to prevent any violence during the screening. The good news is that Sunday night, as of writing this, there hasn't been a single report of anything happening during a Joker screening. Much of the fear seemed to largely stem from people being afraid Joker would incite another 2012 Aurora tragedy. Fears that this movie would serve as a rallying cry for incels that could encourage an attack. The reality is that, if anything, this movie is an indictment of the U.S. failure to sufficiently fund the reasonable social services required to help those in need. You might be wondering why I spent so long talking about the public's reaction to this movie rather than the movie itself. Because once the dust is settled and all is said and done with Joker, two things will remain from it. One will be an outstanding performance by Joaquin Phoenix. The other will be all the buzz and raw overreactions to the idea of a Joker movie. That's not to say this is a bad movie. This is a slightly better than average movie, buoyed by a great leading performance. Phoenix stars as Arthur Fleck. He works for an agency that rents clowns to businesses. He has psychological issues that he is seeing a therapist for and taking medications. He lives with his mother, Frances Conroy. The two of them spend their evenings watching their favorite talk show, Live with Murray Franklin, Robert De Niro. As one might expect, events go poorly for Arthur, and step by step, we see his mental descent take over his life. I cannot stress enough how phenomenal Phoenix is in his performance. Inevitably, every movie with an iteration of the Joker in it since The Dark Knight will be compared to Heath Ledger's seminal performance. Phoenix avoids this by taking the role in a radically different direction. It helps that the Joker is altered in this movie from villain into more of an anti-hero. Also, Phoenix essentially plays an insane man, unsuccessfully trying to squeeze himself into societal norms, yet only truly finding himself when he embraces his insanity. Obviously not the route most mental health professionals would choose. Part of the shortcomings are from director Todd Phillips. He even recently discussed how he could no longer direct comedies because people are too sensitive, which is unadulterated nonsense. The problem with Joker is that Phillips directs it like a Martin Scorsese movie, which, given that certain Scorsese movies were a huge inspiration for this movie, makes a sort of sense. However, it also has a side effect, making this movie feel like a knockoff Scorsese movie instead of a Phillips movie. Simply looking back one movie into Phillips' filmography, you see the dark comedy War Dogs, a movie much better directed than Joker, simply because Phillips was doing his own thing rather than aping off one of the greats. It must be stressed that Phillips is a very talented director. He just isn't Scorsese. One could make a compelling argument for Scorsese being the greatest director of all time. Looking at War Dogs, it makes you wonder what Joker could have been if Phillips directed to his own strengths instead of mimicking someone else's. A dark comedy could be a truly unique take on this story. The only tragedy of this movie is that it's good, just clearly not as good as it could have been. Phillips is better directing his movies than he is directing Scorsese's.
They think order and chaos are somehow opposites and try to control what won't be.